So now I have great pleasure in introducing our next speaker, Jeffrey Tucker. I was actually lucky because my husband and I were driving down to South Carolina to see my folks over Christmas, and we had one of his books on tape, the one that was read by Stefan Molyneux. And I said to Jeffrey last night, it amused me because a lot of his essays are written in the first person, and so I know it's another author that I admire, and then I've got Stefan Molyneux sort of reading it, and he'll be like, "I blah de blah," and it just in my head, I was like, this is just weird. And the other thing that I really admire about Jeffrey as a writer is that he's incredibly accessible. I actually read your work when I started sort of getting to these ideas on Lew Rockwell, and it was one of the writers I enjoyed the most because instead of it sort of being the Debbie Downer, the economy, oh, whoa, we're all gonna die, they're trying to kill us, you know, it's sort of this positive free market message. It's like, I'm in a grocery store, cereal, something that's accessible to all of us. And I think you're one of the most successful writers for me in terms of spreading a message beyond sort of, just us geek nerd minds. So Jeffrey Tucker heads up the Laissez-Faire Books, and he's an editorial consultant with the Mises.org. As I mentioned, he does write for Lew Rockwell as well. He's the author of 3 books, Sing Like a Catholic, which I believe came out in 2009. It's The Jetson World, Private Miracles and Public Crimes. And then my personal favorite, which I'm sure this is why Chris asked me to introduce him, is There Is Nothing Wrong with a Man Who Defends Your Right to Drink in the Morning. So his 3rd book, Bourbon for Breakfast, Living Outside the Status Quo, is of course a personal favorite. The last thing I would like to mention before Jeffrey comes up is every year we have Liberty Forum, or since I've been involved, I always give a best dressed nod, and the last recipient was Anthony Gregory, who of course also writes for Lew Rockwell, and I would now like to pass the baton to Best Dressed Libertarian.
Thanks so much for that very lovely introduction. I very much appreciate it. It's an unusual thing to stand up and, first be preceded by a speech that makes me feel like a moderate, in a way. I mean, I can't say that that's ever happened to me before. It's disorienting and wonderful. Some very challenging ideas. Yeah, fascinating. And I'm intrigued to be exposed to this wonderful sort of cell of liberty. I had heard about the Free State Project for years. I didn't know that much about it, really, and didn't bother to investigate it. And I'm embarrassed now because I come here and I see all this wonderful human activity and all this wonderful intellectual activity going on, and you can just see what beautiful things are coming out of it. I've been inspired by every conversation I've had since I got into town. It's my first time to New Hampshire, and to be exposed to this beautiful scene of these libertarians all sort of taking action with a devotion to not just, go to Washington and say, you really should change the law because markets are really efficient. I don't know if you'd heard that, really. But I know your intentions are wonderful, but there's small ways in which what you're doing is not quite right, Well, that's the way I think many people have done things for a very long time, and you know what? It's not working. Not working very well at all, is it? But what you're doing is very interesting to me because, I began to think about this the other day. By the way, my topic today is going to be on the digital age, and it's a big topic, and it's a change in topic because I was originally scheduled to speak tomorrow, and I had a plan to deliver a wonderful lecture on the history of silly putty, okay, which is a very interesting lecture. Maybe I can deliver that one next year, right? But because I'm speaking so early in the program, I'm talking about big themes, okay, big stuff. So I was thinking about the Free State Project in light of sort of the history of liberty. Considering whether or not liberty had ever been granted to any people because they sort of went to their masters and the elites and the aristocracy that held the monopoly on force and said, could you please recognize our rights and our liberty? And their master said, oh, okay. I mean, it's really never happened. And if you look at the great moments in the history of liberty, I mean, you know, you think we all loved the American Revolution, but you know what? That didn't appear out of nowhere, did it? There were 150 years worth of experience that preceded that event in which people practiced and lived and came to love liberty. They built a civilization, a very beautiful civilization that emerged out of kind of a state of anarchy, the closest thing we've probably seen in modern times. And the infrastructure was there. The families, the communities, the associations, the businesses. They built a civilization out of their liberties, and when it came time to do something about defending it, it wasn't so difficult because the infrastructure was already in place. So then it was just a matter of kicking out the intruders, and that was the end of the story. Most people think it's the beginning of a story. No, it was the end of a story, end of a very long story. I encourage you to look at Murray Rothbard's wonderful history of colonial America to come to understand this. And so think of another great moment in liberty. I always like to reflect on the repeal of prohibition, for example, as an actual event that brought us more liberty, brought to us by, of all people, FDR. Very strange, very strange. I mean, people voted for him because they thought he was going to bring more liberty, and in this one respect, I suppose he did. But imagine that if, after the constitutional amendment banning liquor had been passed, everyone said, oh, the government doesn't want us to drink anymore, or make liquor, or buy or sell the stuff. Okay, we won't. And that was the end of the story. Would there have been any reason for 10 years, 12 years later, for that amendment to have been repealed? No, not at all. We'd still have it today. Would have been no pressure. Nothing would have ever happened. But instead, people said, this is crazy. This is insane. So, over the course of a decade, you saw the development of a massive network of speakeasies and bootleggers and a whole culture of drinking. That's where we get the mixed drink from. You know, before that, people didn't tend to mix drinks and call them cool names or anything. They just, you know. So there was an experience of liberty, an experience of defiance that preceded that big upgrade in human well-being that came with the repeal of prohibition. And you could look at the same thing in terms of the end of slavery in the United States. You know, slaves in the South didn't just accept their plight and agree to be whipped and comply, and that would have been the end of the story, and it would have gone like that, on like that forever. No, instead there was an attempt, as best they could, even under conditions of slavery, to construct families and community centers and professional associations and to be educated and to build schools and in every possible way push the limits, to build a system of liberty out of whatever liberties you have, and then to test that system up against the limits until the system breaks down. And that's essentially the story of what happened. And it was a beautiful thing. And we've seen this again and again. And I think once in 100 years from now, when you're looking back at our times, and people ask the question, well, how did they get it? How did they drive this insane tyranny out of existence? How did they get rid of the police state? How did the American empire come to an end? How did the money go from being this rotten paper stuff into something of high quality? How did people achieve civil liberties after they lived in times when you could be arrested on the street for any reason whatsoever? How did this happen? I think that in the future, people will look to things like the Free State Project and say, well, you know what they did? They took it into their own hands, and they built their own civilization of liberty. I think that's what we're going to be looking at in the future. We're very much the benefactors of the digital age, without which I sincerely doubt much of what we're seeing in a positive way around the world would exist at all. And I would date the digital age from the year 1995, which sticks in my mind as a highly significant moment in human history for a number of reasons. Murray Rothbard died. And I was thinking about Murray when I was coming here because, you know, Murray back in the 60s and the 1970s would travel from event to event, libertarian event to libertarian event. And he wouldn't drive, so he would have his wife drive him. And he would always be lost somewhere. The event would be held in somebody's home. There were about 12 people there. You know, there wasn't much going on, but he was always at every possible event that he was ever invited to. And here, you know, here's my luxury to be able to walk into this event where there's all these wonderful people, there's huge networks that are already formed and already well established. If Murray could see things like this today, he would be amazed. So I don't know how many people in this room believe in God, but if you do, you might consider that perhaps the privatization of the internet in 1995 and the advent of the digital economy was God's way of giving liberty a chance after the death of Murray Rothbard. So in 1995, there were 16 million people on the internet, and today there are about 2 billion, and it's growing by leaps and bounds all the time. And so we're seeing in this, what do we mean by the digital age? And this is the way I like to think of it. And I'm not going to footnote everything I say today, so let me just give a big shout out to Hans Hermann Hoppe, Stefan Kinsella. These are the two greatest thinkers of our time, I think, in the libertarian world. So practically everything I say today, I've just stolen from them, just outright. So just know that. So the digital age, one of these great moments in the history of the world where there's a transition from one giant thing to another giant thing. So another example would be, of course, the transition from an agricultural-based economy to an industrial economy, or in the late 19th century, the move from iron to steel. You know, something that caused a gigantic upgrade. And in these times, we see the effects of these technological changes in the form of economic growth. That, for example, in the Gilded Age was 5% and 10% per year, which, if we transferred to our times in the digital age, where we see this gigantic shift of productive energy being transferred from the physical world, from the world of scarcity, to the digital world, which is the world of non-scarcity. Goods and services moving from being scarce goods to becoming non-scarce goods. What would that mean for us in a free market economy where things that once took 5 years now take 5 minutes? Where you can communicate instantaneously with a wireless video device with anyone in the world, where that would have been inconceivable 10 years ago. What would that mean for us in a free market? What kind of growth levels would we have seen? 5, 10, 15, 20% per year? How rich would we be? How much more prosperous? How much more peaceful? But instead, what have we seen? We saw, and also in 1995, the beginning of the construction of what we would call the modern police state today, and the massive increase of regulations and monetary manipulations of every sort. The advent of what we would call the modern tyranny really began that same year. And so the state has stolen from the digital age many of its great advantages that would be accruing to us today. They robbed us. We don't see this because it never happened. It's an example of the unseen costs of intervention. But it is a crime. It's a crime that we're struggling now to just eke out 2 and 3% growth. And mostly that's just a farce anyway, because you can't even trust these government statistics at all. But it's an outrage. It's an outrage. If the move from iron to steel and the invention of railroads would have brought about gigantic increases in the lifespans of human beings, would have just virtually eliminated, compared to all human history, infant mortality, and led to 5, 10% growth per year, what would the digital age have done? What would it have done if the state hadn't been around to rob us of that advantage? Nonetheless, it does exist, and it's a very beautiful thing. Liberty has a chance in an age of digits. In a way it doesn't in a world that is bound by the physical only, by the world of scarcity only. And that's because the state, as John pointed out, is defined essentially by its capacity for physical coercion, for the monopolization of physical force. In the world of ideas, this power doesn't amount to nearly as much. For example, every word I say in this speech, let's say you're a state and you decide to aggress against my ideas. How are you going to do it? That's not possible. The words have already been said. You've already taken them. You've already embodied them. You're carrying them with you. It's over. The deal is done. Nothing the state can do can take away that idea once it's been transmitted. You see? That's a beautiful thing. The state controls all the physical property it sits on. So when its tanks are in Iraq, it controls the ground underneath the tank. And that's a physical world phenomenon because of the existence of scarcity. But in the digital age, ideas are everywhere. It's a daily, minute-by-minute global sandstorm. The state can't control that. That's a very beautiful thing. And that's because the digital age is built on ideas and not on the idea of scarcity of physical property. So let me just quickly lay out a model for you to help to understand the world. So why do we have prices? Why do we have the necessity for economizing? You've all had these discussions with socialists, right? They say, well, you know, I'm not so hip to capitalism, you know, because there's a lot of greed and, you know, there's profits and some people get rich and whatever. And you have to explain to them, well, look, they're really essentially, we live in a world of scarcity. So there's only two ways, really, to allocate goods and services in a world of scarcity. You can steal them, or you can come up with a peaceful system by which people exchange. And the exchange ratios are those prices. And you can take those prices to draw up accounting ledgers and discover what is profitable. And therefore, property goes to its most highly valued uses in society. Now, you've already lost the guy. If he's a socialist, he's I mean, in that old-fashioned sense, because he doesn't understand anything. I mean, I can't understand. I mean, what is with the, you know, I don't get this mindset. You know, it's like, okay, well, let's try socialism. Let's start with socialism in my shoes that I'm wearing. How are we going to socialize my shoes? How are we going to do this? If you wear my shoes, I can't wear my shoes. And if I'm wearing my shoes, you can't. How are we going to have socialism in my shoes, right? There's no answer to this. They don't get, you know, the fundamental point. You know, the scarcity restricts our ability to imagine collective ownership. It's just not possible. In fact, it is preposterous. On the other hand, in the world of ideas, something is completely different. I can own my idea, pass it on to you, and you can own it too. Isn't that something? You don't take it away from me. You don't take it away. And it's not like after I give this speech, if you all remember it, I'm suddenly, you know, going to go up to a room and no, I'm still going to have all the ideas in my head. George Bernard Shaw said it very simply. He said, well, ideas are different from physical property because, for example, if I have an apple and you have an apple and we trade, we both have one apple still. But if you have an idea and I have an idea and we exchange, then we both have two ideas. So it's a very simple point, but it's extremely profound. It's the essential difference between the industrial age and the digital age is the capacity for ideas to be infinitely multipliable and reproducible. I mean, unto infinity. That's an extraordinary thing. The more things we can take out of the physical world and put into the digital world, the more the limits of scarcity come to be transcended. Let me ask, how many people in here were raised in a kind of a German household, like where there's German? Okay, we've got a few. Okay, do you know this term, Schlaraffenland? Yeah. Okay. Did you know it? Schlaraffenland. No. Okay. So this is very interesting. So if you're raised in a German household and you slept late and you didn't clean up the dishes and you didn't want to go to work and essentially didn't want to do your homework and you were kind of a lazy bum, like that song, I just want to sleep all day, you know, whatever that I hear all the time at the convenience store. Okay, your mother would say to you, hey, get out of bed, this is not Schlafenland, right? So what is Schlafenland? I'm saying this, butchering this German. Well, it comes from a Grimm's fairy tale. And it's a story about a world of astonishing plenty. It's still a physical world. Everybody's just going along their business. But when it snows, the snow is powdered sugar. And when it hails, it is little sugar cubes. And there's an unlimited amount of food for everybody. In fact, it's already cooked. There's a scene in the Grimm's fairy tale that has a pig walking along, except he's already roasted. And he's got forks sticking out of him. So you can just walk up to the pig and grab the thing and, you know, grab a piece of him and eat him. And this is, I guess, in the German mind, a utopia. I don't really get that, but, you know. Another very interesting aspect in the English version, in any case, which in medieval England, actually this Grimm's fairy tale wasn't invented by Grimm, it goes back to the Middle Ages, but in English lore, this same land was called Cockaigne, which, I don't know, Americans have never heard that term, Cockaigne. I guess you're English, or maybe if you're Shakespeare or something, you would know Cockaigne, but it's the same sort of thing. It's a physical world, but where there's massive plenty. In the Grimm's version, there's a passing remark that the plows in Schlafenland, they are pulled without any horses or cows. They do it on their own. Well, very interesting, because about 60 years later after this was written, that in fact came true, right? So very interesting. So in Schlafenland, all your needs are taken care of. But nonetheless, it's a completely real world. And I would suggest to you that in many ways, the digital world is this land. In so many ways, it is. Because of this capacity for the infinite replication of ideas. At the same time, just like it's a mistake to regard this Cockaigne or Schlafenland as being a purely it's not heaven. It's not the same thing as heaven because it's a physical world. In the same way, the digital world is real because ideas are real. We shouldn't think of them as floating vapors. They're the real deal. When you look around the world at everything that human beings have made, there is nothing you can see that wasn't preceded by an idea. You know, all you see around you is like the final results of a long process of thinking. And so it's impossible to imagine the physical world without also understanding that there's a foreshadowing that takes place in the realm of ideas. And it's wonderful to look at you right now. But if I looked at you in a different kind of way, I would see a completely different scene. And let me explain this by analogy. So if you go in to get a CAT scan, you drink a little potion before you get the CAT scan that like colors all your insides with special colors, right? So that way when the CAT scan goes through and you look at the x-ray, you can actually see things. If you don't drink the fluid, it's just a big black, you know, mush, right? So you drink the fluid to color all your insides so that the CAT scan can read it properly. So imagine if we could color ideas, right? So instead of just being like invisible, we drink a potion so that our ideas are kind of like making shapes and colors in the sky. What would I see if I looked out over this room right now? It would be a beautiful scene, wouldn't it? It would just be flooded with colors of all sorts of things. They'd be bursting and moving and flying from place to place. And that's what we would see if we could all drink this magic potion. And so it is in all of the world. If you could go out into the crowds of people and see their ideas, we would see amazing beauty. And that very beauty that we're seeing is what we see in the digital world. The clash, the coming together, the production of, the mixing of ideas. The most important first step to anything beautiful happening in the physical world. As I mentioned, in the realm of the digital world, all ideas are non-scarce. And you can discover this for yourself. If you go to your computer and you right-click on any file on your hard drive, you have three options. You can delete the file, and just like in the physical world, throw it out. I can cut it and repaste it somewhere else. Or, very magically and very interestingly and mysteriously, you can copy it. And that is amazing. You know, you talk to people who are inexperienced in the world of computers, they don't quite believe it, you know. They don't quite believe it. You know, if somebody says, well, send me that photo, they're like, well, I don't want to, I know, I kind of want my photo. You know, no, I mean, just, you know, just send it to me. It's not going to take it away from me. What do you mean it's not going to take it away from me? If I send it to you, I won't have it. No, you will still have it. Well, how's that possible? I mean, I talked to my grandparents. It's difficult to, you know, get them to understand this, you know. The infinite copyability of things. It's not just once or twice, but it's billions. There's infinite number of copies that can be made in this non-scarce world. Contrasted with government, it only deals with scarce resources. It only does. Go back and read John Maynard Keynes's general theory and examine the world in which he's writing. It's only about physical property. The whole Keynesian apparatus is only it's premised on the idea that everything is physical. Nothing is reproducible, really. Everything is just these big aggregates crashing into each other. There's no concept of anything like a world of ideas. That is the real world. And the governments can't plan the world of ideas. They can only plan the physical world. I'm particularly intrigued by this capacity for reproducibility because if you think about it, you can kind of like re-understand all of human history as a great struggle to get to this point. In ancient times, anybody who could reproduce something and copy an infinite number of copies was considered like a godlike figure or a magician or somebody that we should bow down and worship because he had this astounding capacity. The story of the loaves and the fishes in the Bible is a good example of that. Jesus took one basket of food and he fed the multitude. I mean, what more proof do you need that this guy is, you know, God, right? I mean, that's the idea here, and so it is, and you can understand why there is this perception. Well, mainly there is a technological limitation. I mean, think about it. From the beginning of time up until the 1830s, there was essentially no way for anyone to get a message from here to there other than by sea or by foot or maybe by riding on a horse. And forget trying to get a message to a geographically non-contiguous place. That was impossible. So what happened in the 1830s to change that forever? What is it? Well, the railroads is an interesting guess. I don't think it applies because the railroad is like a faster horse. I think it was called the Iron Horse, right? But yes, the answer is the telegraph. That was the real break in all of human history because we saw for the first time the capacity to transmit information in a way that was geographically non-contiguous. You could get it from here to there, even without seeing it. I mean, you could always send smoke signals, right? If you had that's always a trouble, right? If like the wind's blowing or whatever, you get confused. I mean, even now, you know, when, you know, at the Vatican, they still use the smoke signal to tell you if there's a new pope. You know, everybody's still confused. You know, the crowds are standing around waiting. Oh, here comes some smoke. Is it white? No, it's white. No, wait a minute. No, it's a little bit black. Well, it's sort of gray. Do we have a pope? I don't know. I wish they'd just text, you know. Smoke signals aren't so great. What is that scene, you know, in the American Revolution where the guy holds a lantern? It's like 1 if by land, 2 if by sea, or, you know, whatever, you know. But you had to, like, see the lantern, and, you know, if the tree was in the way, what were we going to do, you know? So the telegraph was it. And I don't think it's a coincidence at all that we saw in the 19th century the most explosive economic growth in all of human history. We've never seen anything like it. I mean, if I had my beloved graphs here, I could show you. The population soared, lifespan soared, income soared. I mean, it's crazy. It was like, you know, we lived no better than the animals up until essentially that point in history, and suddenly everything just shoots up, skyrockets. Why? Because we were able to communicate for the first time. Because we were able to share ideas. Everything in the world of ideas is reproducible unto infinity, whereas governments are crazy temporary. They're only dealing with the here and now. And in the world of ideas, things are non-depreciating, so they never go down in value. I can cite something written by Aristotle today, and it's just as valuable as it was when he said it. You cannot say that about the physical world. I mean, if you had a choice, live in the world of ideas or live in the world of scarcity, what you're going to choose? I mean, you've got infinite reproducibility, you've got non-depreciation. Ideas are durable and non-displaceable, as compared to the world that the government rules. Look at the public schools, for example. You know, I mean, not exactly. Very crucially, ideas are malleable. So you can take anything I say today and change it however you want. I gotta, you know, that was a pretty good speech. I wish they hadn't given that one stupid example about Jesus or whatever. You know, you can cut that out if you want, you know. You can take it with you and change it and remix it. This is crucially important for the advance of civilization. And let me illustrate it. How many of you work in like normal businesses and things like that? So you have to go to meetings, right? I mean, oh, we got a meeting today? Do we have to have a meeting? Yeah, we got to have a meeting. Nobody wants to go to a meeting. And there are two kinds of meetings in my experience. There are kinds of meetings where everybody meets and they assert a demand. Well, this is what I want to do. And somebody else says, well, that's not right. You should do what I want to do. And then somebody else says, no, both of you are wrong. Really, my idea is the best one. And this is ultimately resolved by the boss, you know, whoever the big cheese is in the room. Well, you know, I've listened carefully to all your ideas, and I'm deciding to go with that one, okay? And then everybody breaks up and goes out of the meeting. This is a terrible meeting. This is a terrible meeting. It's a waste of everybody's time. I mean, the boss should just made his decision, never called the meeting. The best kinds of meetings are those where everybody comes in with ideas. They have their own ideas, and they discover, as a result of talking to each other, that no one person really had the right idea, but instead they learned from each other and came up with something better than existed before the meeting occurred. So that is where the real value of human communication occurs. And when you leave a meeting like that, you're like, wow, that was cool. All right? That was really cool. It only happens if you get the right kind of temperaments and the right kind of spirit, you know, in the room. Well, in the world of digital media, this goes on every second of the day. You bring whatever you have to the table, but you're learning all the time. So what emerges is something more valuable than what came into it. That's an amazing thing. That's an act of creativity that can only happen in the world of malleable ideas, where you can take something and remix it with something else and come up with something even better. Also, ideas are universalizable, unlike governments. Now think about it. I mean, U.S. government, it wants to be, you know, the world government. It wants to be the universal force, you know, in the world. Nothing stands in its way. It should be everywhere at once. It has a heck of a time doing this. It goes to Iraq and, you know, pounds the place for 10 years, 12 years, whatever, leaves, and suddenly everybody's killing each other, and everybody wants to get rid of it. You know, it was a hopeless thing to try to rule Iraq. And same thing with Afghanistan. Same thing pretty much where the U.S. has ever been. The rule is very tenuous. It's almost impossible to universalize government. But ideas, on the other hand, today, they can become universal in a matter of minutes. It's unbelievable. And why are they sticky? Why are ideas sticky? Because people believe them and adopt them, because they make them their own voluntarily. And it's a beautiful thing. So in that sense, the world of ideas is capable of doing something no government could ever do. They're also historically determinative. As I say, nothing exists in this world that didn't begin in an idea, whereas everything government does mostly turns out to be wrong. I mean, how many budget predictions do we get, you know, day after day? I mean, virtually everything a government official predicts turns out not to be true. If anything, governments are historically non-determinative. They don't do anything but get bad predictions. Here's a very important point about the world of ideas. You know, there's no structure of production in the world of ideas. Do you know what I mean by structure of production? So in the physical world, everything has to go through a series of stages, and at each stage there's a price calculation that goes into it to see if it can continue. So everything must be sort of assembled like a Hayekian triangle, you know, in this way. Why is that? Because it's scarce? Because everything has to be governed by price relations? Because there has to be a calculation at every stage? In the world of ideas, there is no structure of production. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise, because they're completely wrong about this. And I've heard people try to argue that there's a structure of production in the world of ideas. And you know how it goes? It's like, first a professor thinks of something, and then he passes it on to his students. And then gradually it goes through the culture, and the pundits, you know, the secondhand dealers in ideas talk about it. And then that goes to the media, and then people begin to believe it. And eventually, the common man, the hoi polloi, the working class slobs, eventually adopt this idea of their own, and then it all comes into realization. This is just completely wrong. I mean, this is it's just totally wrong because it's the importing to the world of ideas something that, yes, it's true in the physical world. It is not true in the world of ideas. One idea, no matter what the source, can cause a revolution all around the world without going through any stages of production whatsoever. It may come from the academy. It may come from just a completely different place altogether. I was just talking last night on Free Talk Live about a book that came out in the early 70s by the Tannehills, called The Market for Liberty. Do you know the book? Very interesting book. And who was it written by? They weren't professors. They weren't trained. I don't know. I mean, I imagine that they wrote it in their trailer home, and nobody ever heard of them before or since. And yet, the book, you know, continues to speak to us and made very powerful contributions, very serious contributions. So there is no structure of production that we have to worry about, which means that the world of ideas, and the digital economy in particular, is not necessarily at all subject to the booms and busts that the physical world is. Why do we go through such booms and busts? It's because of the central banks giving bad signals through its interest rate. And why should that matter at all? Because of the time and the structure that's associated with production. You get a bad signal along the way, you're going to get overinvestment in some areas and a neglect of other areas that's eventually going to correct. So the whole structure of the business cycle is bound up with the physical world. But in the world of ideas, since there is no structure of production, they cannot be manipulated by the central bank in the same sort of way. That makes it almost impenetrable to even the most egregious forms of government tyranny. One of those is the manipulation of money. The other is, and I would say this is the second most horrible power of the state, and that is its control over this world of ideas, that it would presume to intervene into it and give monopoly to some ideas at the expense of other ones. And I'm speaking in particular here of this preposterous idea of intellectual property rights, which was invented by the state and only universalized about a century ago, and which is being used today to destroy, they're not going to get away with it, but this is what they want to do. They want to destroy the digital age. We heard a reference to SOPA a few minutes ago. That's the essence of it. It's the imposition of intellectual property rights on a universal scale, which would bring civilization to a grinding halt, I guarantee you. But they don't need SOPA to do it. They already have that power. The day after SOPA was defeated, what happened? You followed the news, right? Mega Upload, this big, large site, which was shut down. Shut down. I mean, exactly the very power that everybody was afraid of with SOPA, turns out the government already has it. This whole idea of getting Congress to vote on a piece of legislation, that's just a veneer. It's a game they play. You know, oh, let's have a piece of legislation and vote. If we don't favor it, then there won't be a law. If we do favor it, it will be the law. These guys are all jokers. I mean, it's laughable. They push this nonsense legislation out there so they can sort of trade their votes. I mean, it's like a marketplace, you know. But otherwise, I mean, the real state, not the veneer, the politicians, these faces out there, these temporary managers that like to strut and pretend as if they're ruling the world, the real state underneath that veneer, which is the permanent bureaucracy, the real machinery that doesn't care in the slightest bit about who's elected, already has the power to do what they did with Mega Upload. And it's the most frightening power they could ever have. I would say maybe the second most. Money is number one. Control over ideas is number two. So I would urge you, and I think this is very much to the credit of Stefan Kinsella, to look into this subject of intellectual property and consider it very carefully and reject it, because it has no part in any libertarian theory of the world. It's extremely dangerous. And insofar as it's possible to live without the use of intellectual property, we should do so. We should be publishing into the commons. It's open to us. We can do that. Copyrights we can evade with one simple step. Before you die, make sure that you give your literary legacy to the commons and don't appoint a literary executor, which will doom everything you ever thought, I promise you. Don't publish with conventional publishers, because they will steal your work until 70 years after you're dead. This is true. I deal with this on a daily basis with authors that want me to bring their works back into print. Can't do it. Can't do it. They say, what do you mean you can't do it? I wrote it, it's mine. You signed a contract, and the state is enforcing that contract. Your publisher owns what you thought until 70 years after you're dead. Too bad. You made a mistake. Don't do it again. All right? Okay, I'm out of time. I'd like to take some questions, but I would just like to say here, I would like to end again with a reminder of what I talked about in the very first remarks when I began the speech about the very beautiful thing that's happening in New Hampshire and is happening all over the world and is happening in the digital world, which is the creation of zones of liberty where we are free to act and free to build and free to create larger and larger structures in which we are producers, with which we cooperate with each other. In the digital world in particular, we're able to build a kind of new civilization. And as this gets ever stronger, we're going to test the limits, aren't we? All of us are going to test the limits and bump up against this thing we call the state. And at some point in the future, at some point, it will become incredibly obvious that this beast is an anachronism, that it has nothing to do with the new world we created. And then it will fall. And I'm saying something no different from what Mises himself wrote in 1949. He says, in the long run, even the most despotic governments, with all their brutality and cruelty, are no match for ideas. Eventually, the ideology that has won the support of the majority, I think he's wrong about the numbers, doesn't need to be a majority, it will prevail and cut the ground from under the tyrant's feet. Then the oppressed, many, will rise in rebellion and overthrow their masters. Thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead. I do have some time for questions or discussion. Yeah.
Tangentially, something you said earlier,
yeah.
I tend to agree with, specifically, my friends are going to tease me about this, but specifically when you name drop two names, I tend to agree with you wholeheartedly. Hans Hermann Hoppe and Stefan Kinsella are titans in the movement.
Yes.
One thing I'm torn with as being a relatively younger person in the movement, not an intellectual, is there seems to be a split between what you call the right libertarians and the people like Hans Hermann Hoppe.
Okay.
And the left libertarians.
Yeah, that's fine. Let me tell you something. Back when I was let me think how old I was. I was 18 years old. I used to get a publication called Human Events. Do you know this thing? I was just getting interested in politics, and I thought, oh great, here's a publication that will tell me how to think. That's what I need. And so I began to think like I'll say something you'll like. Just give me a chance. And so I would read this, and then one day I kept it stuff for 6 months. I thought, this politics ideology stuff is simple. One publication, I just believe what they say, and then move on. And then one day I read an article that I knew was wrong, and it was a big moment for me because I thought, I'm going to have to think for myself. And that was the beginning of the end of all this nonsense of following one particular brand of thought. Like this morning I bought a Pop-Tart in the candy machine out there. It's a lot of people buy their politics. They just put the thing in and press a button, F8, out it comes F. We don't have to do that. We can draw. My point is we can draw from any traditions we want to. You can draw from the left, libertarians. You can draw from Hans Haber, Stefan Kinsella, Gary Chanche. You can read any of these guys. You can read anybody you want. You're free to do this. And then you remix their ideas, and you know what? On your own and through your own work, you might come up with something even better. And then you can put that out there and let the next generation tear your ideas to shreds and come up with something even better than that. So my point is, don't join a camp. What's the point of this? It's nonsense. Libertarians are fighting with each other. Pfft, you don't have to fight with them. Do you? You don't. Take whatever is valuable from whatever source you can find it. And do with it what you will. Go ahead.
Well, I wasn't actually going to go there specifically, but more for how do you, maybe some suggestions on how I can get my necessity friends to stop writing off Portfest. And Bob Murphy went, he wrote a great write-up. I'd love next Portfest to see you, Lou Rock, and Lafon's there.
Yeah.
And Stefan. And I'd also like to see maybe people from New Hampshire stop writing off the Mises crowd as, you know, we all know the slurs that people say that.
Yeah, look, I don't know. Again, we can't, you know, people will forever fight with each other. You know, I mean, but it's up to you. It's up to you whether you want to partake in this stuff or not. I mean, I think it's best just to read whatever you want to read and believe whatever you think is the most valuable thing. I'm sorry that there are factions within the libertarian world, you know, but I don't think it's really the goal to have everybody just sitting on the same platform loving each other. You know, I mean, I wish that we could create this world. I mean, oftentimes, I mean, look, I've spent, you know, better part of 2 decades regretting all this nonsense that you're talking about, but you know, ultimately, you know, the best way to deal with it is to ignore it. You know, just take what you want. I mean, I find, look, John said some things earlier today that like set me back. I mean, really, I really hadn't thought of it that way, and I'm going to be thinking about it for the next few days. I mean, it's some really challenging stuff I hadn't considered. If I were a kind of a party man, I'd say, well, that's a heresy. He's not one of my, you know, tribe, you know? But that's nonsense. We're not a tribe. We're not a tribe. We're certainly not an ideological tribe. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing about ideas. You know, I mentioned the example of a sandstorm earlier. That's really what it is. We can take whatever we want. And it's preposterous to assemble ideological groups into tribes. It makes no sense whatsoever. The worst thing about the physical world is its limits. We have to have tribes, right, in the physical world, okay. We have to live in, you know, sort of, you know, areas or whatever. In the intellectual world, anything is possible. It is Schlaraffenland, you know. So go with it, run with it. And again, I regret splits. I regret the existence of human pettiness and all the rest of it. It need not stop us or make any difference whatsoever in the agenda of the future that we all have. Yes, anyone else? Yeah, go ahead, sir.
This, I guess, relates to your comment on the majority
yeah.
and the whole discussion we've had on ideas and thinking. And I'm wondering what your observation is about the general population, in that so many of my friends who are successful people, I don't think they even think, other than their own business world or what it is they have to accomplish. But in the face of the world crumbling and you show them things, it's like denial or just,
yeah.
just not even.
So I understand your point, and it's annoys the hell out of me too when, you know, you can't sort of get people to think properly. I'll never forget this. I had this breakfast one morning with I'm a director of a choir. Okay, so I'm a director of a choir, and she is like a dedicated. One of my altos is a dedicated, like I would call her like a communist, really. You know. I mean, it's incredible, the things she believes. It just amazed me. And so we try to keep the topic of conversation on music as much as possible. But look, she couldn't handle it anymore because she thought, you know, I like this guy, but my director is like a defender of robber barons, you know, and it's bugging me, you know. So she took me out to breakfast to shape me up. And she said to me, now, Jeffrey, I have to tell you something that may shock you. I'm a socialist. How can you believe in capitalism? Okay, so I'm in an opulent hotel. And we've got people waiting on us. And they're bringing us fresh fruit from all over the world. And sausages and biscuits and, you know, this and that. She's very fussy, you know. She's like, oh, well, you know, I'd like my biscuits to be a little more done, you know. And they're waiting on her hand and foot, you know. And we're paying something like $6 or something for this. And my mouth just fell open. As I looked around and saw what was going on, I thought, if she doesn't know the answer to this question already, I just really don't know what to say. So I kind of mumbled a few things about, human productivity or whatever, and then changed the subject back to music. I just don't know. I mean, it's very frustrating. Maybe I should have evangelized, for the next hour, but I thought it might be a little bit tedious. I think people like that are ultimately going to be won over by the institutional change. This very nice alto friend of mine wants to live in a free world. She doesn't really want to live in a state of communism. She doesn't really. She thinks she does. She doesn't really. She's a wonderful person and a beautiful singer who wants to exercise her rights every moment of the day. And you know what? The world that we all dream of in this room, it's a perfectly happy and wonderful place for her to be. We just need to somehow bring about that change, and then we will see people like this grow to further appreciate the institutions of liberty as it happens and as our message continues to permeate. And nor do I think that it's essential for us to convert every last human being into an anarcho-capitalist. I don't believe that. And let me explain why. I live in a subdivision. So that means that I'm governed by a covenant. Do you know about these things? Like I can't paint my door with like stripes or something, everybody, like the fascists come and arrest me or something like that. I don't know why I'm doing this, but anyway. So I've been to these owners' meetings at the subdivision level. And I live in a university town, so people have like weird ideologies. They believe crazy things. So I'm sitting in a room about like this, and all of us homeowners are there, and we're all trying to decide whether or not, we should put like a new park up, or should we cover the heater vents, with bushes, or, what are we going to do about that guy who puts a trampoline in his front yard, or, and so on and so on. And I was a little bit amazed because it was a very beautiful and peaceful meeting where everybody seemed to agree, more or less. We had differences, but there was a civil discussion, and the results, it seemed like everybody was happy with. Well, I walked away from that, and I thought, that's very interesting. There was a huge differences among this group. Ideologies all over the place. People have different theories of what you should eat, whether you should recycle or not, whether we should all be marching around with brown shirts. I don't know what anybody believes in this room, and you know what? It doesn't matter, because we all agreed on the essential thing, and you know what that was, right? That we want our neighborhood to be as beautiful and as high a value as possible. That's it, because we're all owners. So after that, didn't matter what we believed. So anyway, I use that as a metaphor, as an analogy to explain to you. I don't think it's essential that we bring everybody in the globe over to our point of view in order to see the kind of liberty we dream about to be realized in our times. I think a free society is a very diverse society. What matters is that we are all owners and that we agree on the essentials, which is human rights, human liberty, and the construction of the most beautiful world possible. And on that, I think most of humanity agrees.